In the beginning, before the letter of the law was written, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was the Wild West of card effects. There was no rhyme or reason to how card effects were structured. Cards could unite the graveyard with the deck. And floodgates remained active, no matter what the situation. Then, in 2011, Konami officially released their guidelines for problem-solving card text, drafting a language template for all cards to be standardized to, creating the lawyer-like gameplay seen throughout modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Today. In an effort to retrofit older cards to modern standards, Konami employed an errata system to rewrite cards when needed, either due to problem-solving card text, or due to other more silly circumstances. Sometimes cards need to have their names fixed due to archetypal circumstances. Yu-Gi-Oh! GX's frontrunner elemental hero Burstinatrix is one of those monsters. To ensure that the heroes were not at risk of undershooting their diversity and inclusion quota, the only woman among the elemental heroes had her name shifted to correct the all-caps hero brand name and to show that she was indeed part of the elemental heroes. And speaking of archetypal erratas and edgy social commentary, Burstinatrix pulls double duty for erratas as, with the arrival of new faces among the elemental heroes, her flavor text was updated from the only woman among the elemental heroes, once again not following proper hero branding, to immortalizing her as the first elemental hero woman. Another example would be metaphysical regeneration, which would see its name errated to supernatural regeneration due to accidental archetypal inclusion. And while there's no such thing as a metaphysical archetype, reading the fine print reveals that the card is a member of the Metaphys archetype. You know, Metaphys. But even more interesting is that metaphysical regeneration only ever saw one official printing, with 2009's Crimson Crisis. So then, how do we have an errata? Well, this is one of those where online databases like Konami's official Yu-Gi-Oh! Simulator Master Duel come into play. There, we can see the new errata housed in its very own digital simulator entry. Easily the most infamous example of name revision is Frog the Jam, who after constant bullying at the hands of his fellow frog cards, decided to revoke his name and move to Alaska under the new name Slimetoad. You see, Frog the Jam was never meant to be a frog. The frog cards that came after him clearly and explicitly wanted nothing to do with him, often having the text, "Except Frog the Jam," excluding him from their archetypal effects. Konami, knowing that they'd want to release support for the frogs like Center Frog and Sprite Elf, decided it would be much easier to just expel Slimetoad from the frog household. Sometimes cards need fixes to clarify in-game effects and mechanics, and with a game as complex as Yu-Gi-Oh!, sometimes a single word can completely change the dynamic of a card. Aluber, the Jester of Despia, is already a very powerful card, central to the branded Despia strategy that saw top-table performances throughout 2022 and 2023. But upon original printing, Aluber saw much of his power stripped from him. During his original print run for the set Dawn of Majesty, Aluber's on-summon effect had the text, "You can add one Despia spell trap from your deck to your hand." Now if you're having a hard time figuring out what's wrong, don't worry, this isn't some twisted Rorschach test. Looking at the fixed text clears this up. On summon, you can add one branded spell trap from your deck to your hand. Now on the surface, this seems like an innocent misprint, especially when you consider the absolute mosh pit that is the branded cinematic universe. I mean, you've got Sword Soul, Ice Jade, Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, Spring Gans. What's even worse is that Despia's spell and traps do exist. Sure, with Branded, you can fetch Branded Fusion, the deck's most powerful card and one-card starter, but with Despia, you can get the Theater, which is also a branded card. Alien Infiltrator is another card which had to have its text fixed to clarify some bunk game design. The original Alien Infiltrator has the text that, once per turn, this card can move to an adjacent, unoccupied monster card zone. However, this was given the errata, once per turn, this card can move to an adjacent, horizontal, unoccupied monster card zone. From a technical standpoint, it's clear that Konami wanted to rein in on Alien Infiltrator's ability to hot potato its way onto an opponent's adjacent, vertical monster card zone. You know, like an Infiltrator would do. Perhaps the most baffling piece of card text belongs to Penguin Knight, who famously can unite your graveyard cards and your own deck, spawning perhaps the most wacky worded Yu-Gi-Oh card of all time. What you may not know, however, is that this version of Penguin Knight is the errated version from Dark Beginning 1, with the original having a somehow more sensible combine your graveyard cards with your own deck. Of course, much of this can be attributed to the fact that Dark Beginning erratas predate problem-solving card text entirely, and almost undoubtedly was an internal tipping point for pushing for standardized text formats. Finally, we need to talk about the most important errata to the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! An errata that fundamentally changed the way we talk about the card game as a whole. I'm talking about the removal of magic cards in favor of spell cards. With the release of Magician's Force in October 2003, Yu-Gi-Oh's iconic magic cards would move forward with the new keyword, spell cards. This of course flied in the face of multiple set releases prior, with the pinnacle of the festivities being the set Magic Ruler, which would be retconned to Spell Ruler. Now the purpose of this was due to competitive pressures from Wizards of the Coast's Magic the Gathering, a fellow card game that revolved around the term magic cards. To avoid any sort of confusion at your local card shop, as well as the threat of punitive legal action, Konami gracefully conceded the term magic card in favor of spell cards. Luckily, this had the inadvertent effect of bringing us one step closer to the true king of spell slinging, Wizard 101, who also utilized the term spell cards for fear of receiving an unexpected visit from the Pinkertons. The impact of the magic spell swap had both immediate and long-term reach. Obviously, all green border cards moving forward would have the text spell card printed, and all future reprints of original cards that predated Magician's Force would also receive an errata from the magic to spell card. While the card text could easily be replaced, the spoken word could not so easily be dissuaded.
I play the magic card, Pot of Greed.
And as it would turn out, hearing multiple characters throughout the original Duel Monsters anime shout out, "The magic card, Pot of Greed," would have lasting ramifications. Doubly so, as memes about the card's dubious effect would make the mainstream, and other offshoot videos would further bolster the usage of the quote, magic cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! And with much of Yu-Gi-Oh's draw coming from nostalgia, so much so that every anniversary seems to revolve around that original run series, the roots of magic cards would always have a home in Yu-Gi-Oh!, despite not being accurate for more than 20 years worth of card release. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has enjoyed over 25 years of success as a paper trading card game. Through the years, many mistakes have been printed, from purely textual to contextual. With the rise of standardized text procedures and digital formats to play on, the appearance of the errata may become a distant memory, but their lasting impact both in the comedy and the culture of the brand will persist. If only on the 73rd post of How I, Random Redditor 32, would fix Maxi.